To greet you in Christ Jesus and another experience. And what we'd like to do today is to share in a way where the Word of God may become relevant to us and we have an understanding. I want to invite you to Psalm of David, and this is part 2. We started talking about this last week. And Psalms 58, and our text lesson can be found from verse 6 to 11 today, last week, or verse 3 to 5 last week. But this week we would like to go from verse 6 through 11 as we share about that presence of God today. And you'll find these, I'm reading from the KJV, King James Version. You'll find these words as he showed us in that 6th verse of King James. He says, my brothers, give me just 1 second, I'm sorry. Just 1 second. I need to find that scripture lesson that we just mentioned to you. He says, verse 6, break their teeth, O Lord, in their mouth. Break out the great teeth of the young lions, O Lord. Notice this, then he says in verse 7, let them melt away as waters which run continuously. When he bendeth his bow to shoot his arrow, let them be as cut in pieces. Listen to what he's saying now. Verse 8, as a snail which melteth, let every one of them pass away. Let the untimely birth of a woman, that they may not see the sun. Verse 9, before your pots can feel their thorns, he shall take them away as with a whirlwind, both living and in his wrath. 10, the righteous shall rejoice when he sees the vengeance. He shall wash his feet in the blood of the wicked. All right. 11, so that a man shall say, verily, there is a reward for the righteous. Verily, he is a God that judges in the earth. Amen. Bless you. We've been talking about, last week we talked about from the first 5 verses, which was the much pleasance of the verses until you get to verse 11. But we've been talking about the injustice, and it has been a time of injustice. We related to you over 400 years now, a little more now, how that there has been this, which I call a pandemic of injustice. And we talked about it, that it has become so systematic, that it's synthetic in its presence. It is a system that has been created to bring about the injustice against certain people.
All right.
But I raise to your understanding, first of all, in terms of injustice from a common sense, from a everyday, today expression. It simply is a lack of fairness. It is a lack of justice, which means that if we are not fair or just in our doing, then we are unfair and we are injustice. Also, I bring morality that it may fit within all of our lives or the context of our lives individually, is that injustice is in every walk of life.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Injustice is even in families.
Yeah.
And it is also in siblings.
Yeah.
So injustice was true in the life of David, and injustice is true in our life.
Amen.
A lack of
That's right.
fairness, a lack of injustice.
Right.
So we look at this in comparison, since George Floyd was lynched by the presence of another man, knee on his neck,
Yeah.
that after the voice of the peoples throughout this world,
Jesus.
as well as in this country, has been singing loudly, and the application of the voice that have certain terminologies that is embedded in it, but the application of this voice has been Black Lives Matter.
Amen.
Black lives certainly matter,
And
and they do matter.
Amen.
But in the midst of that, there are certain hidden props or certain hidden crutches that support this voice that Black Lives Matter. One of them is this fact of injustice. This fact, as there have been laws that has been put in place, there have been images of statues that have been created
That's right.
to bring forth a presence of a consensus of a mind that do not know, that they may learn from not only just reading and hearing, but they may learn from what they see.
That's right. That's right.
And I don't mean to go in that category of that reality, but I do mean to share with you in such a way that, my brothers and sisters, the gospel does not hide itself from certain categories, but gospel fit the whole life of man.
Yes, it does.
This is why I have taken the privilege to talk about this matter of injustice, because it is somewhat, much more cruel than COVID-19.
All right.
Now, I'm not minimizing what COVID is, but I also want to emphasize the presence of this injustice that just didn't occur in 2020, but this injustice started a long time ago. Are you with me? That's why I thought we should look at this, and particularly look at it from the position that from David's experience. What David shared with us in regards when there was injustice that came up against him.
Yes.
And in some instance, particularly in his case of injustice, it was not that he was rich. It was not that he was his favorite father's son.
I hear you.
As a matter of fact, he was one of the ones who thought the least of. One of the ones that they really didn't expect to make it other than to tend sheep.
I hear you. Right.
But because of the fact that God came a presence of him, and God does make a difference when he come in your life.
Oh, yes.
God took him from the presence of the back of the bus, if you permit me to say that narrative, and placed him on the front seat and gave him an opportunity to even drive the bus. Huh? He was a king. He was in charge. So I just want to share about this King David and how that he had to deal with some injustice in his life, to let us know and to emphasize with us that we've got to deal with some injustice in our lives. But it is a way that Dr. King tried to emphasize without violence. We must deal with this injustice based on the example that God give us beyond Dr. King, but also what he give us through King David. I found great privilege in this, and I wish I had time to go back and relive part one, but time does not permit me with that. But I have great privilege to pick up today where we left off last week, and ask that if you didn't catch it last week, go to YouTube and pick it up last week.
Amen.
This week we must look at the fact that when it seemed like in David injustice that he seemed to emphasize of taking things in his own hand.
All right.
And there are many times in our lives when people mistreat us,
Yes, tell us.
we want to take vengeance and mistreat them or to do them harm. But that's not God's way, because vengeance belongs to God. But sometimes you have to cry out against that which you are against as you submit that to God, because after all, you still have a human presence that you have to deal with.
That's right.
So when we look at this, David, after surrendering to the presence of those who was in justice, and indicated to us to be silent is just as bad as a person who is doing the harm.
All right.
If you see something wrong, then at least you ought to speak up.
Yes.
You ought to say something, and at the very least, you ought to pray about it.
Yes, yes.
Put it in God's hand, because after all, there's some things we can't change. It's going to take God to bring about the change.
Amen.
So as I invite you to this text today, starting with verse 6, and as we say this, David says in King James, break their teeth, O God, in their mouth.
Yes.
Break out the great teeth of the young lions, O Lord. But look as what the brother is saying. It seemed like he was saying, Lord, why don't you just hit him in the mouth? Just knock the teeth out. Huh?
That's right.
You see, I love the beginning of this 6th verse, as David seemed to say, God, knock the teeth out of their mouth. Now, in our language, it sounds like what David is saying, just punch my enemy. You can do it, just doing some harm. But we need to look at the paraphrase of this 6th verse, and notice what else he says. He says, Lord, tear out the young lion's fangs. It's pretty cruel language. But then I gather the issue that he was dealing with was of such an extent that it had really upset his spirit. It was to such a degree, I don't know whether you have experienced that in your life, that sometimes there are some things that come of such a degree that you can't even sleep at night. You can't eat nothing. You just tore all apart, all of peace. It's just to that degree. So it seemed like this brother is saying, knock the teeth out. But what I gather from what David is saying, David is acknowledging that these rulers, these judges, these individuals, they have power and control. But he requests of God that God would do something about their power. There are certain realities that we are confronted with as a people today that we're going to have God to do something about the individuals who are in power.
That's right.
And we've got to pray the God of those individuals. Now you say, well, yes, a nation, a world, but the application of this principle also fit our individualized, because there are peoples that we have to deal with that have power, control, and authority above ours, but yet there's injustice, and we got to deal with that injustice. So David acknowledged that, but he requests God to scatter it. I need you to scatter their power, because after all, if somebody knock your teeth out, they're going to go different ways. They're going to scatter. So I need you to scatter their power. But then look a little further, and I want to encourage my young people, because you have to deal with the injustice among your peers. And I say so often, many times when it comes to peer injustice, it's not that they just don't like you, but the fact is they just don't want you to do any better than they do. That's the problem. It's not that they don't like you in school, But then when you do your best, when you are doing all that you can, and they are loafers within what they're doing, or not doing what they should do, then they begin to hate upon you. That's injustice. That's not fair. That's mental corruption against you for no reason at all. You got to deal with it. So rather than permitting yourselves to be conquered by what they're thinking, you have to keep yourself of a sober mind, and then tell yourself as you trust God, and at least tell your parents about it if you don't tell God about it. So David says in verse 7, he says, verse 7, he says, with us, let them melt away. Catch this now. This is King James. Other versions says it was different. Let them melt away. Can you grasp that? Let them melt away, which run continuously. Now, if I look at this clearly and try to gain forth what is useful and helpful as of the day, he was saying, make them flow away. And verse 7, David presents another unique image of what he wants to happen to those who is bringing about injustice. Make them flow away. Huh? Yes, in this image. Because they will vanish like water that flows away. And if God move in your behalf in regards of your enemies, of those who create an injustice of your life, it can become like flowing water. They will vanish down the stream of life, and you don't know where they went. Another thing you have to realize about this, water has great strength. Did you catch that? Water has great strength. As we have seen in recent years, and particularly even in Alabama, where I'm from, in terms of hurricanes, in terms of tornadoes, in terms of thunderstorms, when water is involved, not talk about the wind, but when water is involved, water has great strength. But water must also vanish. Water does not stay in one place when it's water of that nature. No matter where the water comes from, water must flow back to its own boundary. David called for God to make these rulers flow away. Huh? These ones that are causing injustice in my life, yes, I just want you to make them flow away. And I can see within the reality of people's marching the streets around this world, that no doubt I can find a presence that God will call this to flow away. It's been heaping up for quite some time, and others have come and things has happened, but I really believe now a change is going to take place. David says, he said, listen, here's what I want you to do. Make them blunt for me if you don't mind. And even the arrows that I have to do damage against me as an expression, make the arrows of the bows and the arrows that are, make them be headless arrows. And this is another unique image that this brother used. And it's good advice for us, rather than we becoming upset and doing crazy stuff. It's just pray and turn it over to God, no matter what it is that you're up against. Turn it over to God and let God work it out. So he was saying, as the NIV talks about this arrow business, he says, in NIV it says, when they draw the bow, let their arrows be blunt. It ain't much damage you can do with a blunt arrow. Particularly if you're expecting to kill somebody. Huh? You may hurt them, but you won't kill them. You may blunt them, but you won't pierce them. So basically, David called the God to know their attack upon the innocent. And that's what people are actually pleading for in the street now. Make no these systems that are in place and these hearts of mine that are set out to think that they are better than somebody else. To think that they are better because they have a 4-year edge as a set of peoples who help build what they are enjoying. You can always do better if you can manipulate somebody else for your purpose, which means it's not only you working, now you got the mind of somebody else working for you. So this brother was pleading, and it's good advice of us, of the church, to plead to God against this injustice that peoples are marching and standing up for. You may not be able to walk the streets, but at least you can pray. Does that make sense with you? Something we all can do in the presence of this pandemic of injustice. God has called us to be our brothers and sisters keepers. Yet, it happened even in our society today. David called to God that their power be broken. And let me just bring up another example, and then we'll let you go. In verse 8, observe what he says. Please listen to it. The voice, the spirit of David, as it is cried out, as God give us an example. See, this is why we have this word to be an example to us. That it may enhance us within that presence of life, that we may do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. He says in this example, and it's strange as odd, but then as you look at this, he says, as a snail which melteth, let every one of them pass away. Now, I don't know what your language is, snails or either a slug, which is the same, how you look at this, but David used a picture of watching a snail or a slug move across in their way.
That's right.
What does that mean? Well, as they move, if you notice by the snail, and when I was a little boy, we used to see them, we put salt on them to dissolve them. Y'all too young know what I'm talking about, but that's okay. Huh? So he talks about this in this fashion. As you watch a snail or slug move across their way, as they move, they leave a trail of slime behind them. Are you with me? As if the snail or slug is dissolving and melting away. You see, whenever injustice is present, there's always a trail of acts, A-C-T-S, acts that follow the injustice. That is why, because injustice, some of my brothers got hung on a tree unjustly. That is why we're treated the way we're treated, even as a people, by those who are of authority that should be protecting us, but they are working against us because injustice has been created and it leaves a trail behind it. He says, make them melt. That's what he says. Then he talks about also end it from the beginning. David wished these individuals who brought about this injustice end would have come as the beginning started. That's right. You see, you can only do injustice for a period of time, but when God says enough is enough, he'll reel up. He's not going to leave us see the glory, but he'll reel up the spirit and the working of his angelic host among the likeness of mankind that will bring about a change that brings a pleasure of God. I may not see the fullness and the completeness, as say, to a degree of this injustice did away with in my lifetime. But I got good news. The world that is now and the world that coming is not going to stand for injustice like it has in the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years back, or 400 years back. You see what I'm saying? If our lives were going to lead with wickedness, and the intent of that goal is an evil goal, then it would have been better if they had never been born in the first place. I wish I can inject some names in this sermon, but since it's going to be on the air, I will be careful of the names I inject. David desired to see the oppressed wicked cease for the enjoyment and the presence of justice and the power and the righteousness of God. Oh, there's a hope now. And I would encourage all of us, no matter where you are and what you're going through, wherever there's injustice or whatever level of your life or whatever point of your life you're in where there is injustice, if you just trust God with it, He'll make a difference. So the final verse of this song speaks about David confident that God will bring about the justice that has been lacking. The wickedness and evil that you create against peoples. God will bring about judgment. And He has a righteous reward with Him. David seemed to recognize that the judgment against the wicked may take some time in coming. But I got good news for you. It will come. Evidently, God will take care of the wicked. He'll sweep it away. And then in verse 9 he says, before your pots can feel the thorns, He shall take away them away as with the whirlwind, both living and in His wrath. You know, He describes this injustice, in this 9th verse. Judgment is a very chilly reality. Yes, if you ever have to deal with the judgment of God, I want to let you know that it's not a comfortable judgment. Unless it is a judgment of righteousness. He shall take them away. As David said, it is like a whirlwind. As in His living and burning wrath. This sentence describes the wrath of God in very destructive terms. First, they will be taken away as in a whirlwind. The image of the whirlwind is intended to conjure a feeling of something that is terrible. Whirlwind can lift the roof off a house. Whirlwind can turn over side a big truck. Whirlwind can blow you and I away. From the whirlwind, David said, "Long, take them on to the fire." God is trying to help us understand what we're up against when we got to deal with wicked people in high places. Consider how God explained to Israel, His own people. I heard God saying, listen, Israel, well, the day you cross Jordan, Jordan River, as you go along, and you as a nation become strong and fortitude by my spirit. You see, God knew that they was going to have to confront, a strong people. God knew that sometime in this old life, you're going to have to come up against strong opposition. And he won't let you know if you trust him. If you ever have a giant experience, why your God is bigger than any giant. Yes, he is. And you got to realize and understand, like he did for Israel, he brought them across a mighty Red Sea. And he led them to a promised land. Opposition after opposition, trouble after trouble, sorrow after sorrow. But God was still invested with him. You can understand if you trust the Lord. When the Lord God deliver you, you got to realize, in the little thing and in the big thing, it's not you. But it's God one who has delivered you. So then I cannot say in all of these years where I come from. I got to say where God brought me from. That's what's important when you're able to see and understand that the Lord God is the one who is the giver. He is the one who will deliver you from injustice. So I want to encourage you during this pandemic of injustice to turn to God because he's able to deliver us in this injustice. Don't tell him how to do it. Don't tell him who to use. But just tell him, Lord, we're trusting you to be our judge now. Because the Bible says in verse 10 of our text, the righteous shall rejoice when he sees the vengeance of God. He shall or she shall wash the feet in the blood of the wicked. What God is saying, if you trust him, this is a mighty good picture. If you really trust me, I want to let you know the day will come. Those who push you down, we're gonna wash you as he lifts you up. He wants you to know those who try to hold you down are gonna see you one day climbing Jacob's ladder, and they're not gonna know how you made it. But I got good news, and you got the good news too. Surely in this life, I know if I sow righteousness, I will reach the righteousness of God. I tell you, if I do all the other people have them to do it to me, God will. You don't have me. God will bring about righteousness, and it should be like a mighty stream in my life. Is he all right? Are you trusting him as you go through your injustice? Are you trusting him as others do you wrong? Are you telling him about it and leaving it with him? Standing still, watch the salvation of God. God always come out a winner. Do you know God is a winner? If you know God is a winner, and if you're on God's side and know you are a winner, let me hear you say yeah, yeah. Declare unto him what it is. Declare unto him what it is. And wait on him to work it out. Trust him. If you're in Christ and the Spirit of God is in you, may not come when you want him to come. But he will come. And he'll be right on time. Trust him. Eternal God, we come now trusting you in these times where there is a natural pandemic, but yet there is a spiritual pandemic. We trust you for that now. And we pray for both of them. We pray for those who are positioned and have some authority to say their end. But we pray to you ultimately because your Spirit can move on hearts and minds and soften them in terms of the example that David gave us. Be merciful to us. Lead us and touch us and keep us for Christ's sake. In Jesus' name, amen.